That's why we say George Lucas raped our childhood. 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 George Lucas raped our childhood.
This is what happened after the prequels of Star Wars released. The hatred was so strong, nobody really spoke of the movies. The actor of Jar Jar Binks considered suicide. Jake Lloyd, who played Kid Anakin, ended up in a mental hospital. Hayden Christensen's career was crushed and he was nearly never seen again in any Star Wars conferences because of the hate. Was it worth it? Were the prequels as bad as these fans proclaimed they are? And even if they are that bad, did this hatred help shape the next Star Wars to be inherently better, or at least more fit for the nostalgia-driven fanbase? I'm Opposite, and here is why the prequels are the best Star Wars movies. Now, let's find out. That hatred, particularly for the Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, manifested in many forms, and many reasons were cited as the cause of it. So let's review them one by one, shall we? To see what basis do they have, and perhaps I'm wrong, and the prequels are horrors to be removed from history. The first of those, and perhaps the most famous, is Jar Jar Binks. This view was so popular, George Lucas himself addressed it, claiming that Jar Jar was for the kids, not unlike C-3PO's role in the original trilogy. With this at hand, I feel that still much can be added to the defense of this character. First of all, he doesn't have such an important role as people proclaim him to be. Secondly, he's an amphibian alien, a type which we never saw before, with a cool design and background. I never found him to be really annoying, and to be honest, as a kid I laughed at some of his scenes. From the start, he was not intended to be so serious. He was a giant meme back then, and he is now. He doesn't matter much to the story, and thus his contribution to the film is very slim, focused and purpose towards the younger audience, which I did not hear them complaining about him. The second supposed issue is of the insertion of politics into the prequels. First thing first, I would argue that the original trilogy is political as well. The fact that it's black and white doesn't change that. Luke was clearly inspired by the Germans in World War II when designing the Empire. However, time had passed since the 70s, and if people are to believe that the Jedi actions affect everything, there is a need to show that. Not only in battle, like the originals, but overall. The prequels are not a cliché story of a classical hero, unlike the originals. As a prequel to a very nostalgic cultural milestone, they have quite a hard job to do. How do you stand up to such movies so highly regarded? Let's look at, for example, the Batman movie franchise. The first couple movies of it in the 90s were very well received, but after a while, the fourth was hated by many, and the franchise has been put on hold. What happened when a sequel finally came in the form of the Nolan trilogy? Did it do everything the same way as the gothic and cliché movies that don't get me wrong, of the 90s, or did it provide an edgier, different version which stayed with us for a long time? You can argue that people do not care much about the prequels, unlike the Nolan trilogy, but I disagree. The prequels does have a large fan base, even if small compared to the originals. The politics provided a much needed layer to the black and white hero cliché stories of the originals. It made Star Wars finally science fiction, not space fantasy. It provided us not only with great lore with the introduction of basically everything lore in Star Wars except the few tiny bits we got in the originals, but with series beloved by many. The Clone Wars, a series which could not have existed in the dull, good versus bad scenario of the originals. I would argue that not only the politics are not a problem, they are one of this trilogy's strengths. They could have been done horribly, and they were not. Instead of being a classical Satan like in the originals, Palpatine literally orchestrated an entire war for both sides only to destroy one from within and use their tools to his advantage and annihilate the other completely, to rise to the ultimate place of power in the galaxy. It was a much needed contrast to the originals to give it identity of its own, gave the whole franchise a new layer of depth, aliens and lore, and made the prequel trilogy unique. The third issue is bad acting. This time I'm going to focus one at a time. Jake Lloyd, as I've said before, was sent to a mental hospital after the episode. He was a little kid back then, but he managed to capture Anakin's innocence and sadness as a kid. While some proclaimed he was not dark enough, Anakin only got darker much later in the middle of Attack of the Clones. This kid was not supposed to be dark, he was supposed to be an ambitious yet a little delusional naive boy, and Jake Lloyd did a wonderful job at that. Ahmed Best got criticism for a character that was not his fault. The actor had a voice matching the humoristic purpose of Jar Jar, which some of the fans apparently cannot stand, but would have been better if it was voiced by someone else? I don't think so. From them, we go to the one and only Hayden Christensen. Hayden got the most hate for being a supposedly crybaby, heartless, and cliché. Again, like with most of the issues with the prequels, it dissolves if you look in closely. As a kid, Anakin have been through much. Being a slave, losing his mother, seeing all that he cared about threatened to be destroyed. His supposed bad lines, even if you even can call that, are again not his fault. Do I really need to remind you that Anakin grew up with Jedi, the Star Wars equivalent of extreme Buddhist monks, and was told to never share and express his feelings? He doesn't know to address her. He doesn't know how to approach her. He's awkward and shy. Ironically, when a famous actor like Joaquin does the same, even though it's more cringe in my opinion, he gets critical acclaim. And all of that is without mentioning Samuel Jackson, Ewan McGregor, and of course, Ian McDiarmid's timeless acting. The fourth issue is the editing and CGI. There's no denying that the CGI could be better. However, consider the time it was released, the end of the 90s. CGI barely started, it was mostly used on movies with the same models all over again, like the Uruk-hai of Lord of the Rings. Never before have a movie attempted to portray so many aliens, much more than there were in the original trilogy. Not to mention that the effects and scenes are still remembered to this day as some of the best Star Wars has to offer. Kamino, Mustafar, Geonosis, the Separatist Council, and of course, General Grievous. It's true that some of the editing was a bit weak, particularly with Binks, a character literally made out of CGI, but for the challenge it was at the time, the end result was nearly fantastic. The prequels have given us whole worlds and planets that stand to this day as the best. They look better, they are more solid and diverse and realistic than the original trilogy. The space battle in the start of Revenge of the Sith is a very impressive one, with many types of the very best ships both the Republic and the Separatists have to offer. Now compare that to the almost static laser shots of the original, which look like they were photoshopped into the screen. And forgive me, for I prefer my Yoda looking good than a freaking doll that even does not move its eyes. Now, we move to the fifth issue commonly addressed, which is the supposedly cringe dialogue. Let's start with the fact that Star Wars is a space opera. It doesn't have to be as realistic as the world is, and it is doubly the case in the originals with ridiculously black and white lines like Ben's "Only a master of evil does." If you look closely to these lines, both in the prequels and the originals, and just generally pay attention to the motives of the films, you can see that Star Wars is built as a fantasy movie, like a legend, full of cliches. If you still say the dialogue is weak, I would explain each one at a time. Anakin grew up with the Jedi who never allowed him to express what he thinks or feels. Usually it means that people are calm like Obi-Wan, but Anakin have joined the Order late after developing a personality of his own, causing the personality and the rules to collide. He doesn't know a thing about how to talk to her. What did you expect? That he would spit magic out of his mouth and be a master womanizer? Next, to the battle with Obi-Wan. Anakin, emotionally torn apart and angry, tells him Jedi are evil from his point of view. Now realistically, Anakin would not have been thinking of a heroic thing to say in such scenario. Most of the good fancy lines of the originals come from after battle ends or while Vader is chatting with Sidious. He then has the luxury of thinking about what he has to say. Palpatine manipulated Anakin to see things from a perspective that would be useful to Palpatine. Anakin truly believed what he said, and it makes a lot of sense given the lack of care the Jedi provided for him. The Jedi here, unlike the originals, are not angels, and the Sith are not demons. There's a thing called morally ambiguous that the originals haven't heard of, but the prequels have, thanks to the games, Knights of the Old Republic. The Jedi became weak, arrogant, and blind. Mace nearly killed Palpatine, although he already had the upper hand. defying the Jedi code of never attacking unless in self-defense. All of this, along with the emotional turmoil with Anakin in his head when he spewed out his opinion as clearly as he could, given the circumstances. Most of the lines of the prequels have an explanation like that when you really think about it. And guess what? Like the Spider-Man trilogy of Raimi, the good lines of the prequels will be forever remembered through memes and the fancy "what is thy bidding, master" fantasy imitations of the original trilogy would be fading through time. The dialogues are mostly great. There simply needs to be an eye who does not exist to take everything at face value. The sixth issue is going to be a short one, simply because it does not deserve more than that. People complain that the midichlorians ruin the mystery of the Force. Well, guess what? Star Wars is science fiction. Things like that need explanation, and it's a way to measure how powerful a Force user really is. There's a ton of details about the Force left untold, and it barely gives a biological name for a fantasy element in a science fiction movie series. We already knew the Force was connected to the inside of people, but it was merely given a name. It's a very stupid thing to cling on and judge a whole movie trilogy by. The seventh one, bad humor, is a matter of taste. Personally, I find many scenes from the prequels to be much funnier than the originals. For example, R2 burning these droids in the start of Revenge of the Sith. It was a movie series for a different generation, and the most common nowadays form of humor started to make its way to being what it is today: memes. I want you to name me one better, wider, and more commonly used meme templates for a movie franchise than the classic "hello there," and do it to the high ground, and this is where the fun begins. I want you, go ahead. And the last one is waste potential. What wasted potential exactly? What did the original trilogy give us that the prequels did not provide in better and more? Better effects, as I've stated before. More remembered lines and humor, literal ton of lore and world building that was pretty much non-existent in the originals. New planets and places to explore. A braver story with much harder task to do, and a political, factional, dark, twisted, morally ambiguous take on the classic series. I wholeheartedly disagree with the wasted potential issue, and I think that the prequels have done everything the original did apart from maybe fancy dialogue better. This is the end of part 1. I will do 2 more of these, focusing on comparing the prequels to the other trilogies rather than debunking its supposed flaws like this one. This was a very hard one to make, so thank you for sticking to the end. I hope you enjoyed. Tell me what you think down in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and as always, this is Opposite, signing off.